overwhelmed by your presence, and I thank those very much who play the game and sit and even stand. I hope we have your understanding for the situation, but we just cannot fit more chairs into the space, otherwise it gets really dangerous. So thank you for your understanding, and I will pass on to my colleague Katrin Altmeyer, who's leading the Asian department of the Heinrich Böll Foundation. Thank you, Katrin.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I'm equally impressed about your stamina to sit through this very moving and painful piece of movie and still ready to engage in a debate here. We roughly have scheduled 1 hour for a debate between the two panelists. I will introduce to you one more time briefly, and including some question and answers. But you understand 1 hour is brief, so we will start immediately. And I introduce again Siswo Pramono. He's a deputy ambassador of the Republic of Indonesia to Germany. He's also a political scholar who has published and done research on genocide in a number of countries, and he's also teaching at the university here. Thank you for being here. So Joshua, you already had the chance to introduce yourself tonight. So he's an American citizen with German ancestors, living in Denmark and having spent a lot of time in Indonesia working on these movies. And we talked about the awards, so welcome tonight. And I want to go right into the discussion with you. The movie will start here in Germany October 1st, but it's already in movie theaters in Indonesia. Have you gotten reactions so far?
Well, I just say that October 1st, when the film will come out in Germany, is the 50th anniversary to the day of the start of the 1965 genocide. The film is not in cinemas in Indonesia. Let's be clear. In fact, the Film Censorship Board of Indonesia, pressured by the military and the police, have banned the film that you've just watched from public cinema distribution. That said, the film has been screened very widely. My first film, The Act of Killing, came out in 2012, and you could say helped catalyze a transformation in how the media and the public are talking about the past, where before there was silence across most of the mainstream media. Now there's, or even the celebration of the heroic extermination of the Indonesian left. Now there is a talk about genocide, about a crime against humanity, about mass killing, and most importantly, the present-day legacy of that genocide, the fear, the corruption, the thuggery, the impunity that means that my entire Indonesian crew remains anonymous, that means that I cannot safely return to Indonesia because I'm receiving credible death threats all the time, and that means that the film has been banned. But at least now, this impunity, this fear, this rule of fear is discussed in the media and into the space that The Act of Killing began its life in secret, but as the media started to support it, the screenings of the film became more and more public. In the end, there were thousands of community screenings of the film, publicly held. When the film was nominated for an Academy Award, the government of Indonesia finally, the president's spokesman, finally said, look, we know what happened in 1965 was a crime against humanity. We need reconciliation, but we do not need a film to push us to do this. It was a way of trying to dismiss the film, but it was a wonderful moment because at least the government had felt forced by public opinion to admit what happened was wrong. Then we made the film, or shortly before that, we'd made the film available for free download for everybody in Indonesia. It's been downloaded millions of times. I'm still talking about The Act of Killing, and streamed on YouTube many hundreds of thousands of times too. The film then, into the space opened by The Act of Killing, has now come The Look of Silence. The Look of Silence, unlike The Act of Killing, did not begin its life in secret. The Look of Silence has two official distributors in Indonesia, the National Human Rights Commission and the Jakarta Arts Council. And they held their first screening publicly with billboards announcing the screening. 3,000 people turned up at the largest cinema in Jakarta, or the largest theater in Jakarta. There were 2 screenings so that everybody could see it. Adi, the main character, turned up and received a 15-minute standing ovation. 1 month later, the film came out across the country with 500, building on the network of community groups, universities, cinema clubs that had released The Act of Killing, with 500 public screenings on the first day. We're now at over 3,500 screenings. Many Indonesian media declared the film of the year at the end of 2014. But this very public release somehow provoked a backlash from the army and the police, where they would hire gangsters and thugs, preman, the kind of gangsters at the center of The Act of Killing, to threaten to attack screenings and to use that as an excuse to demand that screenings be canceled. And 30-some screenings were canceled in this way across the country until finally a group of students, despite outraged protest from the press, until a group of students in Yogyakarta finally barricaded themselves into their campus and went ahead with a screening. That received such a positive response in the media that suddenly the attacks ended, or that the threats of violence on screenings ended, but not before the military had managed to pressure the Film Censorship Board to ban the film from public cinema release. So that's the situation with the film at the moment.
Well, thank you for elaborating on that, and I'm sure you would also like to respond to that. I mean, just to give an outlook here on the situation in Indonesia, I think scholars and the public globally agrees that the transition to democracy since the end of the New Order regime is a success story and a glimmer of hope for democracy in Asia. Still, scholars, legal and political scholars, agree that the process of transitional justice has widely failed. But there is a large interest in the movie. We can see there is a large interest also in initiatives by government, by civil society organizations to address the past. Why do you believe it is so difficult?
Yeah, first of all, we also need to give really a credit to Joshua, because if you look at everybody now, you have email or you have anything that you open internet and type the title of this movie in Indonesia, and there will be, you are going to see a lot of comment like, this is the movie that is actually give a positive impact to the reconciliation. You open your internet now, in Jakarta, you will find that article, lot of article like that. So actually, nothing is against this movie in Indonesia. Now, 2 years ago, and I think last year, during the presidential campaign, I believe 1 or 2 here is the success team of the current president. I still remember, in that debate at the time, the candidate, President Jokowi, said, what I'm going to do is to open up, to settle down the 1965 and other gross human rights violations in Indonesia. Now, we have a system of direct election. You choose directly your president. If they choose this guy, meaning they agree on the program. This is a very simple mathematics and logic. Now, of course, not everyone agreed, let alone this kind of moving. I still remember I was in Paris in 1988 when people burned were in cinema because they saw the Last Temptation of Christ. They don't like it because Jesus have a sex with Magdalena. They don't like it. They burned the cinema. It is in Paris during democracy. Now, a movie like this sometimes also give access. But if you look at the internet today, you can see majority of the people thinks this is the best way to start with reconciliation, and the movie reflect one of the ways. After all, if you look really closer to that movie that we just saw a couple of minutes ago, Adi is one of the characters that promoting reconciliation. He says, like, okay, we are not going to revenge, but we accept that at least you can see your remorse, and we are going to apologize. So if I may proceed a little bit now, there are already a committee set up by the president, and now thing is running in the parliament on the draft of the bill, the so-called Justice and Reconciliation. Now, among others, the draft will be passed soon, hopefully, the bill. This one, reconciliation, secondly, rehabilitation of the good names, because once you are blamed as the member of the communist or whatever, and then normally you lose your social status. This must be repaired again. And also some sort of helping these victims with basic needs, health, and everything is in the draft. I don't have to tell the draft because the draft now is in the internet also. So every time the member of the parliament discussing the draft, you can open the website of the parliament and see how it's progressing. Now, I suggest you just to type in your internet on the, we call the RUU, Rancangan Undang-Undang Rekonsiliasi, and then you can find the draft. Yeah.
But I would say a couple things that I'll tell you some things that are in the draft. One thing that's in the draft is that there should be no names named, including of the highest ranking commanders. That's one thing that's in the draft. Another thing that's in the draft is that there should be no legal process even for the highest ranking commanders. There's no provision in the draft for any significant amount of resources to be set aside for a comprehensive truth commission, without which you cannot have reconciliation. Reconciliation can only happen on the basis of truth. And you can't ask people to forgive, which is often the situation in Indonesia, if no one first takes responsibility and no one acknowledges comprehensively what happened and that it was wrong. Often in Indonesia and around the discussion around this draft is this notion of saling memaafkan, forgiving one another. But imagine if in Germany there was a discussion of how well the Jews, the Nazis will apologize and the Jews will apologize, and the Nazis will forgive and the Jews will forgive. It's as disgusting as that.
Now, perhaps, may comment. I have the draft now, and there's nothing to do with what you're saying, Mike. Perhaps you just read the wrong draft. Because the draft number 1, the draft number 2, and everything is progressing well. And as you open up now, I have the draft. You can look yourself now.
Maybe I give for the audience a little background on the draft.
Yeah.
The law on the truth and reconciliation was drafted first, I believe, in 2004, and it was challenged by Indonesian civil society widely because it had provisions for an amnesty for the perpetrators. And this is why it was later revoked, and still then the process to actually come up with a new draft took painfully long.
But Katrin, the fact that the draft can be challenged and the court and the challenger win, it is a proof that democracy works.
This is what I'm saying. But then also what is important to understand when you look at transitional justice processes, and we have seen since the late 1970s a number of those in countries over everywhere in the world, there are very different approaches. Some focus more on peace and stability, and they have worked with amnesties and they have been very successful. Others claim, and this is a school that says justice has to be done, no reconciliation if you don't bring the perpetrators to court. But I think this is for every country to explore which is the best way. And there is not the one best way. So I would like to hear from Siswo how Indonesia decides on what is the best way forward, what is the processes. If there's very little information on what's been going on in 65, if you look at the educational system, if you look also at the legacies of the old regime that has been a major obstacle to transitional justice. So what is the process that you see is now trying to determine what is the best way forward for reconciliation? And what is your personal opinion what the country needs?
There is at least 3 reasons why people are so positive about that, including what the National Commission on Human Rights, your colleagues has mentioned and widely in the newspaper and the television. The first one is we are now the generation without blood in the hands on 1965. Last night, I and my colleagues counted the birthday of all of the governors in Indonesia. We are not going to send Kadoche for the governors, but the purpose is to see how old they are now and to see the median line. And our statistic, we have the data, with, if you wish, we can show it to you. Average, they are 54 years old, meaning when they are, in 1965, shut up, Mike. Alex, my best friend. Now, 55 means they are 4 years old. 4 years old baby, yeah? Now, this is for the governors. And I look at, again, from Jokowi down to all the members of cabinet, 53. So they damn baby too in the 1965. Now, the parliament is the same. My point is this, that this is the 1965 generation. We take care of our nation because I am part of this. My difference with Joshua and perhaps Alex is watch Indonesia. And to watch Indonesia means that you watch from a distance. Yeah. Now, but you stay here, mate. You stay here. I'm staying in my country. I was born there. I'm going to go back there. I would like to prepare something. I'm preparing things for my son, for my, if I have one day a grandson, also for my grandson. So this is our best interest. And with Joshua movie, this is a kind of opening the gate for a better reconciliation. This is the age factors. The second one is the structure of violence. Now, I have the data from the World Bank. If you see, just last year, for the last 10 years, what's happening in the structural violence in Indonesia. And the data says it's going really much, much better today than 10 years ago, if you believe in it. And then I check also the data in Germany. And Germany is a bit going down now. Yeah, I don't know, because of the Pegida and stuff like that.
And in a few years, those lines will cross.
Yeah. No, but this is my point. Now, from the evidence, what the people expect to us, of course, we have the right to have reconciliation. This is our society, yeah? And you have the right to help us too, yeah? Because we are part of the human community. So I think this is the best time that we believe that things can go rather smoothly.
So would you recommend to your ambassador and then back to the government that there should be a statement that there should be official protection of Ari Rukun so that he no longer has to live incognito, in secret, and that I should be welcomed back to the country and with security guarantees, and that thugs hired by the government should not be disrupting screenings anymore, and that the National Human Rights and that the Film Censorship Board should allow this film to be screened in cinemas the way it will be in Germany on the 1st of October?
We don't have any instruction to refuse you to come back. I don't have any instruction from Jakarta that the guy's named Joshua cannot get back to Jakarta.
Of course not.
After all, if you are,
right.
let me finish, mate. If you are German or if you are American, you have the visa free. You just go up, show up, and have fun in Indonesia.
Yes, but I receive 10 to 15 death threats a day.
Not only you, mate. A lot of people live death threats in Indonesia, from ISIS, from a lot of things.
But my death threats aren't from ISIS because they're in Indonesian.
Yeah, but my point is that things like this happen not only because of you make a movie. Anyone can have a death threat in Indonesia. That's why security, that's why security now becomes the main issues. And that's why education...
Would the Indonesian government, forget about whether I go back, I assume you're saying the Indonesian government would be incapable of protecting my safety, but what about Adi, an Indonesian? Has he committed a crime? Should he have to live in secret?
Less than 2 minutes, you're now convinced that the government is going to protect you. 2 minutes ago, you say not. No,
I just asked you whether you would recommend that they should.
I don't have to recommend because they're never giving a threat to you.
No,
you got to make a difference between the threat,
I'm saying,
like the Suharto type threat or the threat from the community.
I'm asking not about whether the government itself would not arrest me or torture me or abduct me. That's not what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I'm asking, would they supply me with a credible security detail so that I could go back without being, would the law enforcement in Indonesia protect me from harm, or would they allow the thugs to attack me the way they allow thugs to attack screenings and the way they pay thugs twice just in the past few months, in January and in February, to attack groups of 70, 80, 90-year-old survivors who come together to talk about opening, in one case, a honey-making cooperative so that they could improve their economic well-being, and another case, a soap-making cooperative. Instead, they come together and they get attacked by thugs paid for by the army.
No, the point is like this.
Would you recommend that the government should stop hiring thugs to carry out those attacks and stop paying on their intelligence agents or them hiring thugs, sending death threats?
We never hire thugs.
I'm not quite finished.
Let me
because this is a
but I finish your both now because I would like to get back to the point.
Yeah.
I think you are oversimplifying here. The government, I would like who that is. We should look at the complexity of processes of transition everywhere in the world, in Indonesia at this point in particular.
But wait.
First of all, we had democratic elections, and we do have, of course, a government that has to deal with a large coalition and with remnants of the old regime that are still there, and I don't think anybody would doubt that. But what I would like to focus on in this discussion is how to overcome the obstacle that lies there.
But with all due respect, Katrin, I think you're oversimplifying.
I don't think that you can get a guarantee for yourself and for Adi tonight. I'm sorry.
Forget about, no, I didn't ask for that. I asked whether he would recommend that. And if not, why? Is it because you'd be afraid?
First, I do not recommend because there's not necessity for that. Because the government is not threatening you now. You make your own these things, perhaps to make the movie much more interesting.
I think that, Katrin, you raised the crucial issue. Wait a moment.
Hold on,
Siswo. I think, Katrin, you did raise the crucial issue about the complexity of the state. What my first film, The Act of Killing, shows undeniably is that there's an official state, there's President Jokowi, there's the parliament, and there's a shadow state of the army, which is legally above the law. An army officer in Indonesia, if he decides to massacre everybody in a village, as Hendro Priyono, an official president advisor, did in 1989 in Lampung, if he decides to massacre any army officer, an entire village, he cannot be brought to civilian court. According to Indonesian law, an ad hoc human rights court would have to be formed, probably through an act of the Attorney General, and with the cooperation of Parliament, to try that crime. That means that for all intents and purposes, the military is formally above the law. This gets to the question of the complexity of the state. You said, and one thing where I feel you oversimplified the state is when you said, and you oversimplified the discourse, Katrin, is when you said there's a sort of emerging consensus that Indonesia's become a democracy. Ariel Herianto, one of the most astute observers of Indonesia, said the distinction between the preman, the gangsters, the thugs, who form this kind of shadow state that works with the oligarchs, and the actual official state is a false one. That the gangsters, everybody knows, are part of the state for all intents and purposes. And I was acknowledged, and there is a complexity in that, of course, the National Human Rights Commission is doing all it can to support this film. The Witness Protection Program, actually a good body in Indonesia, said we would love to be able to protect Adi as someone who's trying to have a very legitimate conversation with his neighbors, but we cannot. We don't have sufficient resources or ability to protect him from the thugs. And my point fundamentally is that the state, when we talk about the state, we're talking about a complex of structures in which there is no rule of law. Democracy is not just about direct elections. Democracy is about the rule of law. It's about law applying equally to the most powerful in society as it does to the weakest. That's not the case in Indonesia. It's not the case really in my own country, the United States. And in that sense, neither of these countries can truly be called democracies.
I haven't called. We're talking about the transition to democracy, and So we open the floor for questions later. you made a very important point saying rule of law democracy is not flawless in the US, and then please see how many years you had to achieve that. And what I was saying is an optimistic view on Indonesia in its transition towards democracy. But you raised a few things, and maybe we can get a very concrete answer from Siswo.
Mm-hmm.
If we get the curtain problem solved first.
Excuse me, please.
So please. So don't lean on the wall here.
With America, you cannot reach democracy.
Yeah.
Never.
We will get.
You're right,
We will
because
get
our
there
constitution
later,
is non-democratic.
we will get there later. But what I would like
Yeah.
to hear from you, Siswo, judiciary reform, military security sector reform is something that many say is a very important part for a transition of justice and transition to democracy also. Do you see any efforts now under the new government to address and approach this very hard issue?
Yes, thank you, Katrin. Actually, reform is not a one overnight process. Everyone knows that. Yeah. So the first reform that we made is on the military, of course, because we have tragedy in East Timor before, Papua, and Aceh, and so on. So the step-by-step reform, first military go out from the politics, military got out of business. Now all the budget of military should and must under the state budget, so it can be controlled by the parliament. Now, the next will be more on like social and justice. And that's why one of the campaigns of the current president before is to bring the state back. He refused to have the weak state. State must be strong enough to protect, not only from as a threat from outside, but also a threat from within own the state. The state perpetrated violence, for instance. And that's why we have so many things that we need to do in order, you know, while at the same time to minimize also the possibility of the excess of the reform itself. Now, 10 years or 20 years ago, people say the same like you when we set up the National Human Rights Commission. So this is rubbish, this is the the tiger papers. But now then we saw the strong of that, and the one that you also prize so much because they help you to make the movie. Now, we believe that in the very beginning, normally people are very skeptical, but let them to make the proof. Because the proof cannot be, okay, we cannot expect in 5 years that Indonesia will be things like Germany, but we have some progress. What we need to make sure that progress happen in every step, not drawbacks. So that's why what I try to convince everyone that progress now is being made. And we need to appreciate that, because after all, you're not going to make a movie in Suharto and result in a very nice movie and very critical like that. You can only make that because the system is good enough for you and ripe enough and helpful enough, even though with all difficulties you have in the field. But eventually, you not only make one movie, but you make 3 movies. One from plantation, the second from the plantation in Sumatra. I watched this movie in the internet. So there is no censorship because everything is in the internet. I watched your second movie on the killing also in the internet. I'm not sure about the third one. If you release in the internet, then we are going to watch it too.
Yes, it will come. I think there's a few important points. First of all, the National Human Rights Commission did not help us to make the movie. They're simply they sponsor the release of the film. Secondly, the National Human Rights Commission, as much as I sympathize with them, is a paper tiger. They published an 800-page report in 2000. They wrote and researched an 800-page report in 2012 about the 1965 massacres, 800 pages of documentation simply to recommend that this should be dealt with. It wasn't the full investigation, it was just an introduction to that. Some of the data came from my footage and the people that with whom I had filmed, and all they can do is submit this to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General has to take a decision whether to recommend the case go forward. The Attorney General said that there was not sufficient evidence to treat the 1965 genocide as a crime against humanity. The 800-page document was deemed classified, so people haven't read it in full, And none of the recommendations are being carried out. That is a paper tiger. I'd say regarding your point that I couldn't have made these films under the Suharto regime, in a way you're probably right. I assume that the military surveillance of the Suharto regime was more robust than it is now, and that that I would have come under suspicion from somebody along the way. But the only reason we made the globalization tapes with constant harassment. I was arrested 16 times in 6 months, with adequate visas, making the act of killing. When we started in 2003, I began working with Adi and his family to try and document what the survivors' experiences were. And within 3 weeks, the army threatened everybody not to participate in the film. Adi then said, don't give up, try to film the perpetrators. And when I went to film the perpetrators, I found that the state, naive it may be, rolled out a red carpet for everything the perpetrators wanted to do on film. And I made this flamboyant fever dream of a film with the perpetrators, and only because I was known to be close to the highest, I shot The Look of Silence after the act of killing was edited, but before it was released, because I knew once it's released I won't be able to safely return, and this is the only window I can make the second film. And when Adi said he wanted to confront the perpetrators, when I returned in 2012, I said, absolutely not. It's too dangerous. It will get you killed. And then I realized, wait a moment, I am known across this region because the production of the act of killing was celebrated as on Indonesian state television in North Sumatra, the regional channel, but state television celebrated the act of killing as this heroic celebration of the 1965 genocide. Because of that, I was famous for being close to the highest ranking perpetrators in the country, which was the only reason we were able to make the next film, because those men who Adi wanted to confront regionally but not nationally powerful would have to think and think again before physically attacking us, because they would not want to offend their commanders. Finally, you raise a very important question about change and reform of the security, the military and security structures in Indonesia. This new government, I was also a supporter of it at election time. I spoke out and wrote an editorial saying how I felt this candidate, Jokowi, would be the better of the two candidates. He said he would deal with the human rights issues. And he, unlike his opponent, Prabowo, had never committed the act of killing. Well, shortly after he took office, he unfortunately did commit the act of killing by ordering 14, in 2 batches, 14 drug dealers killed. These were some of them had only dealt ecstasy. This is a violation of international law. But also, the signs were really alarming from the very beginning. He immediately moved to weaken the one credible, democratically accountable institution in the country, the Corruption Eradication Commission. He appointed somebody under investigation from the Corruption Eradication Commission. He proposed him to be the head of the Indonesian police. He's now the deputy head and will soon become the head next year, in all likelihood. And worse than that, he's just recently appointed Sutoyoso, an army commander in charge, credibly believed to be the man responsible for ordering the murder of the Balibo 5. These are 5 journalists, Western journalists working for Australian television who were covering the invasion of East Timor. They were shot, and their assassination is credibly known to have been ordered by Sutoyoso. He's just appointed him to be the head of the intelligence services. All of these are very upsetting signs, and he chose as his running mate Yusuf Kala, the vice president in the act of killing, who endorsed the old regime's relationship with the shadow state when he says in the act of killing, on camera, internationally notorious for doing so, he said, "We need our gangsters so that we can beat people up and get things done."
So let me briefly wrap that up. I see you're challenging the credibility of the new government to move towards not only reconciliation, but also to democracy.
That's right.
I understood you earlier that you were building very much on a new generation, on a change of generation to change the country. Would it be enough just to wait for a new generation? Or when you hear his argument, do you think you need much more pronounced measures now to change the structure of the government, of the judiciary, the military, or maybe also the legislation?
Yeah, I think we are working on that now. And we already have been working since the previous government as well. Now, you mentioned about your personal experience as an artist. I need to share also my personal experience as an author. If you type my name now in the internet and you see all of my article on genocide, one article is about Indonesia should not be the land of militia is there. And I'm a government officer. The fact that I can criticize my own government is that this is also one point to see that democracy works in my country. Now, secondly, we also have someone high rankings because in your movie you depicts on one member of parliament from Delhi Serdang. Now, there is another member of parliament. The name is Dr. Chiptaning, and he's not from regional parliament, but she's from the central parliament, and she is quite a respectable parliamentarian. She is a female parliamentarian, an author, and also the head of the Commission 9, is responsible for the employment. And he wrote the books. And the book's title is "I'm proud to be the daughter of the member of the Communist Party." Saya bangga menjadi anak PKI. No, the point is not about the book. If you read the book, it's just normal book because the title like this, everyone like it. Now, but the point is that until today, not because he is in the high level of NPTIP, but he never received any harassment. Yeah? I myself, I never received any protest or harassment except from the Malaysian. The Malaysian, every time I wrote about something, said babi Indonesia ngomong lagi, something like that. Now, but my point is that I saw the progress, and I'm quite positive about the progress. What I need to make sure now is the progress it keep going. The progress is never drawbacks, and it is the responsibility for all of us. You are in Germany, you are in America, to make sure that Indonesia is go forward in democracy because it will be good for everyone.
Thanks for this, because my next question to you would have been, what was the reactions to your movie in the US? You also challenged the US contributions or to the 65 events. Could you elaborate a little on this?
Yeah, well, the reaction to the film in the US has been very soul-searching because Americans know that our government was involved with not just the Indonesian massacre, but with many, many other massacres throughout the Cold War period, executed in the name of anti-communism perhaps, but really on behalf of corporations and in complicated ways, but in terrible ways. And Americans encounter this one massacre that they didn't know much about, but turns out to be bigger than almost all the others. And it forces a lot of soul searching. People in America see this film not as a window onto Indonesia and how terrible things are there, but as a mirror about some of the most upsetting aspects of what America is in the contemporary world. That in fact led members of the Senate and the House of Representatives to begin introducing, and now they've been introduced in the Senate, it will happen soon in the House, resolutions demanding that the United States take responsibility for its role in the genocide by declassifying all of its documents pertaining to the genocide and issue a formal apology challenging Indonesia to do the same thing.
Would you welcome that? Insight into the US files? Maybe you have it already.
Going inside the US file, sorry, I don't quite get it. We go to the US file?
No, the United States documents which would detail its role in the genocide. We know some things. We know that the United States provided, for example, the most high-tech and expensive radio equipment so that the Indonesian army could specifically given for the purpose of allowing the Indonesian army to coordinate the massacres across the archipelago. We know that they provided some amounts of weapons, some amounts of money. We also know that a U.S. State Department official who I had the privilege of interviewing named Robert Martins compiled lists of thousands of names of public figures, intellectuals, critical journalists, labor leaders, women's rights activists, environmental activists, land reform activists, all people who are publicly known but might be opposed to the new military regime. This list was handed over to the Indonesian army with instructions or a request, please check off the names as you kill them. Several thousand people were killed that way, and the man I spoke to who did it felt he was providing vital intelligence. I said, but these are public figures. Is this not really incitement? Aren't you not really sending an unmistakable message? Don't just kill core people, kill everybody who might be opposed to your new regime, because we want your new regime to stick, and stick it has.
No, I think in our interest is that we need to be more concentrating in our society first. Because if we are, I told Katrin so many times, if we only fly with one engine, it's not strong enough. So with the reconciliation, Indonesia will be flying with 2 engines, and we will become a very strong nation. So concentration on the reconciliation is for us is a matter of necessity. We are not going, American pardon is your pardons, German pardon is German pardons. Our pardon, we need to take care of it because this is for us. Now, do we need the support for international community? Of course, support is always welcome, but we rely on more on our strength. Because if a kid or a child, you always help them to wake up every time, they've never been strong for themselves. So we believe that we're progressing quite a lot in the track of our history. We believe that it is necessary for us to keep going, with or without you. With your help will be good. We thought it's okay. Now, but the point is that we should not lose hope. Your movie is a good one, but sometimes if you are not really very careful, you only one side, you have to see black and white from only the black side, then everything is becoming very dark.
Well, the task of the artist is to show the dark side so people can address it.
Yeah, dark and white as well, because color is colorful, it's good. It's only, for instance, there are a lot of, I'm not going to detail on your movie, there are a lot of miscalculation or misinterpretation in your movie, for instance.
Well, let me ask you a question about the dark and white first, if that's okay. Because I wonder whether, there's an interesting question, and it relates to the issue of progress that you raised, about what is progress. For example, you talked about, well, for example, recently, and there continue to be massacres, and there continue to be intimidation and torture, and dozens of people held as political prisoners in the western part of the island of Papua, a region that was promised a referendum for its independence decades ago. It never materialized, and it's been under kind of martial law ever since. And the new president recently, and journalists have been simply not allowed to go. They've been not allowed to report there. And the new president announced with some fanfare that now journalists would be welcome to go and cover the situation in Papua. And this at first looks like progress. This looks like something positive, right? An opening. But then immediately, Army spokesman, the Attorney General's office, and the Ministry of Information said there will be a careful process of the vetting of journalists, and only journalists who report positively about the Republic of Indonesia's role in Papua. Only journalists who report good news from Papua will be allowed to go, and those who won't will not only be ejected but punished. And the question is whether the president's statement constitutes progress or deceptive window dressing that actually confuses activists and clouds the moral picture and confuses the public, so the public say, well, it's been dealt with, when in fact the situation could simply worsen under the current regime. There's nothing in the current system
Joshua,
that could... Wait,
from not going into going in, I think that's a progress.
It's not progress if you are punished for reporting bad news and
you cannot
kicked
go
out.
to the States, and now you can go to the States. That's a progress. No, but this is a categorically,
Well,
I'm
this
going to
relates to
because my colleague is a German. It's just come back from Papua.
Let me ask you another, but I don't know the status of your individual colleague, but I do.
No,
I have to ask you a more.
I was also a teacher in Jayapura.
I'd like to ask
so
you
I
a
know
personal
the situation.
question also about what you said. You talked earlier about how you feel sort of positively because you're able to write critical articles vis-a-vis the Indonesian state. I've not read those articles, I'm afraid, but you have not
you
said.
can read it on the
Wait a
internet.
moment,
It's
but you've
available
not
on the
said a
internet.
single critical thing tonight I just point that out. And secondly, I'd also ask, you said that just when you do write these critical articles, which you say you've written, you get attacked by paramilitaries, by Preman, by thugs on the internet, you get harassed. What is it that stops you from condemning the paymasters of those paramilitaries? That is to say, the military, the police, the ministers, the intelligence ministry, which is actually harassing you. Is it fear, Pramono?
I never got any harassment.
You said you receive emails saying that you're a pig and
no, this is from people from the neighboring country, because sometimes I also criticize democracy, and democracy is not perfect, and someone from the other side of the border is not very happy because they can also read my article. So it's nothing to do with threat from Indonesia, but from other countries. Not a threat, but it's like some insulting things.
But my point was whether sometimes false reform plays the role of mystification, of confusing people, and actually can make things worse.
Well, I think we will have time to tell about this, where the reform is going in Indonesia. And we have time constraints here too. We have another 10 minutes left, but I would like to open the floor for a few questions, unless you all say you're too tired. Good, I can see a few hands. Please, honestly, don't make long statements. Give people the chance to ask questions, and especially the audience a chance to really answer, because we have to vacate the room, I think, in 15 minutes. So we collect the questions. We have Clemens here, my colleague, with a mic, and I see in the second row here a lady in white. I see Alex here in front of the pillar, number 2, and I see somebody in the, yeah, please.
My question is, you have been talking here about the situation in Indonesia, and you always mentioned Jakarta. And I remember from researchers about the 65 incidents that the situation was very, very different from one area to the other and from one remote island to the other. And the world has changed in the meantime. So I would like to know, how is the situation today? All the things you talked about, what is the situation in the remoter places, and what is the scale from what situation to what situation? Can I imagine what's going on?
Yeah, let's collect a few questions. We have here.
Okay. Just a short question to Joshua. You mentioned the role of the new president and whether this is just cosmetics if he says Papua is open and if other people are saying it's not. My question is, could you imagine that maybe the president has not that much power, that maybe he's convinced to do the right thing, but he's not able to control the state apparatus? And the second question to Siswo, you mentioned, or you said you put your hopes on the new generation, which is fine, and I support that. But how can the new generation be a critical new generation if they do not have school books who give the true story? If we see the scene in Joshua's film, and I know it from many other schools in Indonesia, they still learn the old version of the Suharto regime on what happened on '65, and the state right now they put Sarwo Edi, one of the bloodiest killers and the architect of the '65 massacre, on the list and proposed him to be a national hero. So how can you idolize such a person and by the same way, but at the same time, hope on the new generation?
Okay, we connect. There were 2 more hands raised in the box there.
Thank you. My question is about a public apology from the president. There has been discussions about that. We saw a public apology by Abdurrahman Wahid, then president, as head of the organization Nadlatul Ulama. Parts of this organization were among the killers, so he apologized as head of that organization. We saw another public apology by the mayor of the city of Palu in Sulawesi. Would you support a public apology by the president?
Okay. My question is to Joshua, how you got into this subject. How did you get that interest? Sorry if it's all over the internet. I didn't find it straight away when Googling. I didn't want to ask this question in case you said it a billion times, but I would just be interested in how you also feel, you know, as a foreigner to talk about this. Because often, if, you know, people say you have to be of the same country if you're going to be so critical and everything. And just a mini short comment, we actually visited the Human Rights Commission in Indonesia after watching this film, and I think it was one of the most disturbing but also very enlightening experiences I've ever had. Some people in my group left the room in disgust and didn't want to be in a picture with some of these people who sort of still defended what happened. But I was part of the people who stayed in the room because I actually felt like it's so difficult for them to talk about it, but they are talking about it, even to foreigners. So I feel like maybe the process is not perfect, and I'm glad that there are people to criticize the process, but I'm also, you know, amazed that it is happening, and I think that's something which yeah, I do see positive, even if the process is maybe not perfect, that at least there is this conversation.
Yeah, we have one more last question. Clemens, here in the front row. You've been raising your hand for a while.
Ich möchte meine Frage also auf Deutsch dann sagen. Das ist, ich verstehe Englisch, aber ich weiß nicht. Also es ist so lange her, dass ich in England gelebt habe. Und das ist meine Frage. Die Geschichte hatte uns gezeigt, dass in solchen Ländern, also wenn solche Massaker, Massenmorde dann passieren, dann sind da meistens eine ausländische Macht also dahinter und unterstützt das. Also ich weiß nicht, ob das in dem Fall auch so war. Und deswegen meine Frage, ob Sie dann darüber etwas wissen, weil wir wissen, auf der Welt Kommunisten gegen Kapitalisten kämpfen und je nachdem, wer Macht dann bekommt und wird von der anderen Seite dann unterstützt und oder vernichtet. Danke.
So I quickly translate that. That was a question about the role of foreign forces behind the massacre of '65, and of course it was during the height of the Cold War and the anti-communism, and I think we would probably be able to elaborate on this here too. Joshua, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll give you very fire round, very quick answers. First, I'll just very quickly say how I came to Indonesia. It was in 2001. I was asked by the International Union of Food and Agricultural Workers in a project actually funded by the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung to make a film with a group of agricultural workers somewhere in the world about their struggle to organize a union. In the aftermath of a totalitarian regime where unions were illegal, I found myself at 26 on a Belgian-owned oil palm plantation, remarkably named Société Financière, Financial Society. The conditions were so diabolical, so dreadful, that the women workers were forced to spray a toxic weed herbicide with no protective clothing that was so poisonous it would get in their lungs, their bloodstream, their livers, and kill them in their 40s. One of the first things they did was to approach the company and demand that they should be given protective clothing, and the company hired Pancasila Youth, the paramilitary group at the center of the act of killing, and one of these groups of thugs that I think constitute the shadow state, backed up by the police and the local military. They threatened and attacked the workers. The workers dropped their demands immediately. I asked, how can you let it go so quickly? After all, is this not a matter of life and death for you? They said it is. But there was a mass killing here in 1965. Our parents and grandparents were killed simply for being in a union. We're afraid this could happen to us again because this is the group that did it. This is the group that did it. And I had this awful realization that what was killing my friends was not just was not just poison, but also fear. And I had this feeling that I'd wandered into Germany 40 years after the Holocaust, only to find the Nazis still somehow in power. If the rest of the world had celebrated the Holocaust while it was taking place. That's that question. I'll be quicker on the others. It's the longest. When I was asked to then, I'll go to the question about being a foreigner. I was asked by the survivors to come back and make a film with them about why they're still afraid today, what it's like for them to live surrounded by the still powerful perpetrators. I explained earlier we were stopped from doing that after 3 weeks. The survivors then said, please don't give up, film the perpetrators, see if they will tell you what they'd done. I was afraid to approach the perpetrators. When I did, I found they were immediately open and boastful. When I showed that to Adi, to the other survivors, to the broader Indonesian human rights community, including a friend of mine named Munir, I'll come to him in a moment, they all said you must continue to film the perpetrators because anybody who sees this anywhere in the world, especially in Indonesia, will be forced to acknowledge that in a terrible way, the Indonesian Holocaust has not ended because the perpetrators are still in power, and if not the perpetrators, then their proteges, even if they're only 54 years old, and fear is destroying people's lives. I then felt not like a foreigner making a film for a foreign audience, but for the next 11 years, I felt like I was an agent of the Indonesian human rights community doing a work that they clearly could not safely do themselves. Munir in 2004, shortly after I started, was murdered. He was on his way to Holland because pressure was on him in Indonesia. He was on his way to Holland to escape that pressure for his human rights activism, totally lawful. He was given a free upgrade on the Garuda Indonesia airplane flight to Holland by an off-duty airplane pilot who said, I admire your work, sit in my seat. He was served a lovely dinner, a glass of orange juice, and they put a lethal dose of arsenic in his orange juice. The man who did it had made hundreds of phone calls that very same day to a man named Heinrich Priono, the same army general I mentioned who had ordered the village massacred in South Sumatra, who'd massacred hundreds of people in a village in South Sumatra. Heinrich Priono was not only chosen to be a key advisor by the new president, but the new president also allowed that off-duty airplane pilot to be released on parole just this year. I had this moment, school books. I agree that the government is still lying to Indonesians, and now that they've admitted in response to my film that what happened was wrong, they ought to not lie to the children anymore. They should teach them the truth. You asked about, there was this interesting story about visiting Komnas HAM and finding that some of the National Human Rights Commissioners were somehow defensive of what happened. Well, Komnas HAM members are selected by Parliament, and some of them are, frankly, and I say this as someone who is thankful for Komnas HAM's work on behalf of my film, some of them are frankly not constructive. And it's not that they're talking about it out of personal bravery. They've been forced to talk about it because the world is talking about it, because the country's talking about it, because the media is talking about it as a result of my films. That brings me to the question about the different pattern of killings around the country. The killings there were different reports about different regions because very little research was done. There was research done in Bali, East Java, Central Java, and that's about it. So people thought, well, that's where the killings happened. But in response to my film, the brave editor of Indonesia's leading news magazine, something like Spiegel in Germany, sent 60 journalists around the country to look and see if they could find perpetrators elsewhere who might boast, to see if what I did was unique to North Sumatra or could have been done elsewhere. Everywhere they went, within minutes, the journalists would enter a neighborhood and say, who was involved with the killings here? Everybody knew, because everywhere the killers were boasting, just like the men in The Look of Silence and The Act of Killing. And they produced they gathered 1,000 pages of boastful testimony about the perpetrators in 2 weeks. They published 75 of them, plus 25 pages about The Act of Killing in a double edition of the biggest news magazine in the country, and in one fell swoop broke the mainstream media's silence on the genocide. That's why the National Human Rights Commissioners, who are on the side of, who are justifying genocide, nevertheless have to talk about it. It's absolutely a tragedy that Siswo Edy, that this government, not even someone in the military, is proposing Siswo Edy, someone who boasted on his deathbed supposedly of killing 3 million people. that he should be proposed to be a national hero, not for something else that he might have done, but for that is terrible. Abdurrahman Wahid, I just want to point out, someone mentioned that when he was head of Nadlatul Ulama, the previous president, head of the largest Muslim organization in the country, had apologized on behalf of his organization in a moment of exceptional moral clarity. He was removed from power for his attempt to revisit these events within months. I think I've answered everything, apart from the question about a public apology.
I think there was a question. What you think about the power of Jokowi?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. I think, and I'll pause for a moment on that because I'm a little out of breath. But I think that Jokowi may be, like Anwar Congo, like every single perpetrator I've met, a nice man with the same individual morality as you or me. And he's unable, it may very well be that he's unable to avoid doing what he does, just as I think Anwar Congo, in a moment of personal weakness, the main character in the act of killing, was somehow unable to find the courage not to participate in mass killing. I don't think the issue here is about whether Jokowi is... We have to find a new narrative, a new way of understanding, and this relates to the key question you raised, a new way of understanding how does transitional justice work, how do democratic transitions work, where we don't simply try to demonize individuals. We have to come up with narratives where we understand institutional power, because you're right, I suppose Jokowi did not want to execute the first 6 people, foreign drug dealers. He had them executed, and then, but once he's done it, once he's been pushed by whatever institution said this will make you look strong, this will make you look like you're defending Indonesia against foreigners who would pollute it. Once he was pushed across that threshold, then guilt haunts him. And others are saying, you've done something great, exactly as what happened with the perpetrators in my films. And then, when it comes time to do it again, Jokowi falls prey to that tragic human flaw, our inability to acknowledge our mistakes, our inability to live with guilt, our inability to accept, and he has to kill the second batch, the next 8 people, so that, because otherwise he would be admitting it was wrong the first time. And this is why every perpetrator that I filmed, being human, knowing the difference between right and wrong, runs away from personal guilt by taking refuge in stories and lies that justify what they've done, and then they cling to those lies for dear life so they can live with themselves, and that requires that they embrace a culture that legitimates killing, legitimates atrocity, and things just get worse and worse and worse. There was one last question about the national apology. Absolutely, there should be a national apology, and it should not be about mutual forgiveness. It should be, I am sorry, this was wrong.
Please, your turn.
Thank you. If I'm not mistaken, before I address all the questions, you mentioned that you did things in Indonesia what human rights failed to do. Well, it's all right to do that. But I mean, this kind of arrogant approach is not really acceptable in Asia. Now, you cannot simply say, because I am there, I'm going to fix you until you can walk again. We experienced this with the IMF, with the World Bank. I prefer to use the terms like working together and learning together, not because you cannot finish the relation between the black and the white in the United States, Abu Ghraibs, and all of the things in offshore America. Then you say that it's better to go to Indonesia and finish the business that Indonesia cannot do. I think this is not the approach that everyone can appreciate. But we appreciate very much your movie, but hopefully you don't have this kind behind your mind. Yeah. Now, I start with addressing another questions. Madam, you are very correct. We are a very large country, 17,000 islands from heart to heart, and every island has their own problem. But the way now we try to address things is this. We try to see the human rights abuse happening in all over Indonesia. So what the new government try to do now is to have 7 lists of the homework that they got to do in 5 years. And the homework now is inserted in the National Development Plan, meaning if they fail to do any progress at the end of the presidency, they will be accountable for that. So the case will be, one is the case of Vasior and Wamena in Papua. This is the job of the president now to finish the human rights abuse there. And then the second is Talang Sari. The third one is disappearance of people during Suharto. Then the next will be the mysterious killing, all the way to 1965. Now the approach will be judicial is for the fresh cases like disappearance, because you still find the bad guys. But for 1965, everyone, the perpetrators and also the victims, majority are either very old or they already passed away. So reconciliation, non-judicial will be the approach. But for the new cases, there certainly will be judicial approach. Yeah. This is the 7th homework that's now written in the national document. If the government failed to do so, Jokowi failed to do so, it will be accountability at the end of his presidency. So this is the firm things that they got. And secondly, the other question is on the context of how foreign countries mingles in even in Indonesia. So I think we are not going to discuss much about that. I mean, American change, Japanese change, everyone change. Yeah. Japanese is also one factor that, like German and Europe in the World War II and World War II, World War I or the Cold War, Japanese is the same guy like Germany in the past. But we look also the role of Japanese getting more and more positive now. So we are not going to see every single countries and try to see what happened in the past. But again, our philosophy is that we will learn from the past, but we don't want to be hijacked by the past. Relation between Japan and Indonesia is important. Japan and Indonesia and America is very important. Indonesia and Australia is also very important. So this is our standpoint. On history that Alex already mentioned, Joshua is right. Now there is clear statement. History to be released means that everyone can write their own narrative, and people can read so many variety of narratives and make their own conclusion. So I have a son, 8 years old. I sent him to the kindergarten in Indonesia, and in the kindergarten they speak only English and Mandarin. Yeah, and that's what happened. I sent them in the kinder field. There is no obligation for me to send in particular school. And the history also changed. The one that you mentioned in your movie is one version that might be taught in particular school. But in other school, they also have their own history. That's not necessarily like in every school they have the same one. You can check on the curriculum now of the national curriculums that the history is not set up from the national levels. Everyone now free to write their own history.
That's simply not true. Right.
Because I never...
I've been trying to... That's simply not true.
I got to finish this. Because I have son, and I always said his history, and the history is not the one that you said. Perhaps in the other area, they have their own standardized book. No, but there is no national now. There is no national standard on that. Yes, but the history, but because the new policy that I got to tell you, the policy of the government now to let the history to be written in different versions. Because this is the policy.
I think we cannot clarify now in this moment who is right. But what I would like to hear from you in regard to this question is: do you think that there should be a standard that teaches? It includes teaching on 65 and the atrocities that were committed.
The standard will be on ethics. How ethics, human rights, will be pretty much standard. Story can be told by everyone, but at least we have some kind of ethics. No, the wrong one, then you can, like in the freedom of the press, you can put rubbish in the article in the newspaper, but you can also write a good article. It is depend on the public to choose, because we have a more and more adult public. The public is getting more smart and educative. Yeah. So we cannot live like in Hitler era that everything must be the same. And if you go to the Indonesia newspaper now, there are a lot of variety of story, and you're free to pick up one. Yeah. So the point is that everyone has the right to write, and everyone has the right to read, and the conclusion is depend on everybody. So this is what my experience. School books now, I told you, I have different opinion with Joshua. In my experience, there is no standardized. The standard is on the examination, but now it's to be reviewed again, whether national examination is important or not. But every series of school, they're free to choose their own book. My son never learned about history because I sent him to the Singaporean school in Jakarta. As a parent, I have a freedom to do so. Not in Germany. In Germany now, everyone got to speak German, including international school. And international school, and BIS, go there tomorrow. International school with German language. In Jakarta, you can speak Mandarin at school. To some extent, we won ahead Germany.
I'm afraid we could open a new debate on the usefulness of standards in textbooks. We don't have the time to do that, so please follow up with the other questions. I'm really interested in what you think about a national apology.
Yes, a national apology. The Commission is now engaging with all the victims through the help of human rights group to figure out what is actually the demand. So now there have been quite clarified, there are two demands already, rehabilitation and then reconstruction of the life. If national apology is needed, then they will be fulfilled as well. Now, SBY actually already offered that I would like to apologize, to ask apology to the victim. We already made that publicly. But at the time, there is no mechanism to, like national committee to fill in this gap. No. But now we have it. Now we have it. If the national committee that consists of the victims and various parties decide that apology is necessity, then apology will be given. Just not in the provincial level, but as the state apology to the victims. Because that's written here in the draft. The draft, the latest draft, not your draft.
I can't argue with that. I only have the draft that was online.
Please look up the latest draft.
That's what I did.
But
That's
as
what's on my phone.
hasn't been gone, as it hasn't been, the law has still not passed, so there might be some alterations to this latest draft as well. We will be eager. We will be eager to look at the next draft. We are eager to see your next film. First of all, maybe see the reactions and how it will be received here, and we will very much like to follow up with you on where the development is going in Indonesia over the next years. We know transitional processes don't happen overnight. I think we all want to see the same results, maybe not in detail, but overall. And let's see next time we meet here where we stand on Indonesia. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you, Siswo. Thank you, Joshua.
And if you like to, you can still be for a short amount of time, be our guests outside. We have put something to drink over there. So if you want to stay a little bit, feel welcome. Thank you.